The North Pole, the truth hidden under the ice, mysteries that will change your view of the world. What lies at the other end of the Earth, and the frozen vastness of the North Pole? Is it possible that this place, which we're told is nothing more than an ice cream parlor, is actually the epicenter of secrets so big that people don't need to know anything about them? Is the North Pole really the navel of the Earth, a sacred and forbidden place where our reality intersects with an underground world hidden beneath layers of ice and snow? These questions are just the beginning of a fascinating journey into the heart of humanity's greatest mysteries. How to explain the fact that the Aurora Borealis, one of the most beautiful and inexplicable natural phenomena, only appears above the North Pole? Why are we not being told the truth about this magical place, the Axis Mundi, the sacred center of the Earth? The North Pole is not just a point on the map. It is the place where it all began, a connecting point between our world and another world, a hidden one that no one must know about. But what lies behind these stories? Is the North Pole really the gateway to an underground world, one that the elites are desperately trying to keep hidden? All the expeditions of the great explorers have been to the North Pole, and not to the South Pole, where there are only endless walls of ice. At the North Pole, everything is different. Why was all this hidden from the eyes of the world? What are the elite afraid of discovering? Could this region, about which we have been told so little, be the key to understanding our true origins and our place in the universe? Axis Mundi, center of the Earth or gateway to another world? Axis Mundi, the center of the world, is a concept present in many cultures and religions around the world. But what does this concept really mean? And how does it relate to the North Pole? Is it possible that this place is really the point of intersection between outer and inner Earth? Is this place the gateway to the earthly Eden, a lost garden hidden from the eyes of mankind? The photo below, taken by the ESA-3 satellite and released by NASA, seems to confirm the theory that the Earth has an opening leading into its interior. But why was this information hidden and the truth distorted? Why are we told that this opening would be at the South Pole, when in fact it is at the North Pole? What else has been hidden from us? And what other discoveries might be made if we had access to these forbidden places? The amazing explorations and testimonies of North Pole pioneers. No one has ever explored the South Pole because, according to some controversial theories, it doesn't exist as we've been told. All the great expeditions took place at the North Pole, and the testimonies of the explorers who got there are astonishing. What did these daredevils discover? Why did they report things so different from what we are officially told? The North Pole is where the cross of the Earth, symbol of forces far greater than we can understand, points to the gateway to the earthly Eden. Is it possible that the symbols we worship today are just a distortion of much deeper truths? Could the swastika, such a controversial symbol, actually be the Northern Cross, a sign of the hidden power of this sacred place? Ordinary people must never reach these ends of the Earth, because then they might realize the truth. The North Pole is the gateway to Eden, and the South Pole is the end of the Earth. What are the elite afraid of discovering? We live in a finite world, a kind of cosmic egg from which no one can escape, for now. But how long can this truth be hidden? The hollow Earth theory and the inner sun. The English mathematician and astronomer Edmund Halley was the first to argue that the Earth is hollow inside and that the Aurora Borealis is actually the reflection of an inner sun that illuminates this underground world. But what else did Halley discover, and why did his research cause so much controversy? Explorers who had the courage to defy the elite and venture to the North Pole reported the existence of a sweet sea, an inexplicable phenomenon in that area of the world. Is it possible that this sea is fed by rivers inside the Earth, a place where life continues to thrive, hidden from our eyes? The mammoths found frozen in the northern ice floes are not just relics of the distant past. Some argue that these creatures still live inside the Earth today, captured by a sudden and intense cooling of the climate. Could the stories of an underground world inhabited by giants and other mysterious creatures be more than just legends? Mysteries hidden in the underworld. William Warren, in his book Paradise Regained, claims that the human race was born on a tropical continent located in the Arctic zone, in a mythical Hyperborea. Is it possible that the Eskimos, with such mysterious origins, are descendants of some inhabitants of this inner paradise? As we approach the North Pole, we encounter more and more evidence of a vibrant and living world, contrary to what we are officially told. Where do all these species of animals and plants come from, and how do they survive in the harsh conditions of the Arctic? Perhaps the answer lies within the Earth, and that underground world we have been taught to ignore. The connection to the modern world and conspiracy theories. After World War II, rumors of Nazi bases in Antarctica and secret expeditions to the North Pole further fueled the mysteries surrounding these regions. What did U.S. Admiral Richard Byrd see during his 1947 expedition? Are rumors of encounters with mysterious beings and advanced technology more than mere fantasy? Tales of an advanced subterranean race that would pilot flying saucers have inspired countless conspiracy theories. But what is really behind these stories? Is it possible that our Earth is more complex and mysterious than we have been led to believe? In conclusion, what we are not being told about the North Pole. The North Pole is not just a geographic point, it is a window into another universe, a place where our reality intersects with the unknown. What other secrets are hidden beneath the eternal ice? And why are the world's elites desperately trying to keep this information away from the general public? As we uncover more and more clues, questions pile up and our imaginations are challenged. What awaits us in the depths of the Earth? It's time to find out the truth. The other end of the Earth is the North Pole, the most important place about which man must know absolutely nothing, apart from the fact that there is only a sea of ice cream. The North Pole is the navel of the Earth. It is the place where you enter their underground world. It is the only place on Earth above which the Aurora Borealis is formed, a phenomenon without explanation. All the expeditions that people made were to the North Pole, not at all to the South Pole where there are only walls of ice. At the North Pole, however, everything is different. There is the Axis Mundi, the center of the Earth we live on. There the outside Earth communicated with the inside, and there was the beginning. Here's why you don't need to know anything about these places, except the stories invented by the elite. The South Pole and the North Pole are the ends of the Earth. They are the end of the known world. They are the territories that surround the Earth under the dome that closes the matrix in which we live. This is why the North must not fit into the hands of the people, because that is where life comes from, and because that is where the elite live. The photo below is taken by the ESA-3 satellite and published by NASA. It was the first time that this agency recognized that the Earth has a hole that leads into its interior. As usual, they could not tell the whole truth, so they declared that it was at the South Pole, because they taught us that in the North there is only frozen water. No one has ever explored the South Pole, because it does not exist. All the expeditions of the great daredevils were made to the North Pole, and absolutely all these explorers reported amazing things about this wonderful place. The North Pole is Axis Mundi, the place where the cross of the Earth indicates the gateway to the earthly Eden. The cross that all the Neradites worship is actually the swastika whose arms have been cut off by the elite. The axis of the world was hidden so that it would not be understood that the man here works and is the slave of another world, which grinds under his feet. All the symbols that they put under our noses, or that they trick us into thinking that we have to lick them in order to feel good, are actually the ways that they have falsified to hide the truth. Man must not know that he is their slave, that he lives in a society based on repression, tyranny, and lies where laws are made so that he can be kept under control. Svastika is the Northern Cross. It is the place that indicates the center of the world, and it is formed by the positions of the Big Dipper and the Pole Star in different seasons. The common man must never reach the ends of the Earth, because then he would realize that at the North Pole is the entrance to Eden, and at the South Pole is the end of the Earth. We live in a kind of egg from which no one can get out, for now. They hid the traces of the other generations that lived and whom they assassinated until their last lives. We are really stepping on their corpses. We are killing the water that sustains us all because we have forgotten that the sky, the man, the air are all water. We cut or burn the trees that help us breathe, and we refuse to see that the world we live in is close to the end. But let's see what wonders the explorers of the North Pole saw, who reached the center of the Earth. I have synthesized part of the thousands of testimonies made by people who had the courage to defy the elite to reach the underground world of the empty earth. The first who had the courage to support this was the English mathematician and astronomer Edmund Halley, 1656 to 1749. He was the first to argue that the Earth is hollow inside and that the Aurora Borealis are actually the reflection of an inner sun that illuminates the underground world. His research and discoveries were published in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London, a work that sparked a huge wave of disputes. On the other hand, Halley is the discoverer of the famous comet that bears his name, so he could not be a visionary. Another follower of the empty earth theory is John Clevey Sims, captain of infantry in the War of 1812 against Great Britain. In his honor, a stone monument was erected in Hamilton that represented a sphere perforated in two symmetrical points. On April 10, 1818, he sent the American Congress, scientists, and university directors a letter in which he mentions, "To the whole world, I declare that the earth is empty inside and fully habitable." To this letter he attached a medical certificate proving that he was in the fullness of all mental faculties. Following his statements, on January 28, 1823, the American Senator Richard Johnson submitted to the same Congress a petition in which he requested the financing of an expedition to the empty earth. Of course, such a proposal was rejected in the greatest haste, and the case closed forever. Edward George Bulwer Lytton, esoteric politician and famous author of the book The Last Days of Pompeii, published in 1873 another book that led to incendiary disputes, The Coming Race. He tells that different human races that escaped from different cataclysms that destroyed the earth in ancient eras took refuge inside it. These races of people maintain their shape thanks to a mysterious fluid called vril. This history inspired many rituals of the Luciferian secret societies, especially the Luminous Lodge of the Nazi Gemini, known as the Vril Society. Among the followers is Rudolf Hess himself. The theory of the empty earth was taken up by the American writer William Reed in the book The Ghost of the Poles, which is based on the testimonies of the polar explorers and on their scientific arguments. This book has been completely hidden in our days. The reason why this well-documented book can no longer be found is due to the detailed explanations from which it appears that the poles of the Earth have never been found because in fact they do not exist. In their place are enormous openings that lead to the interior of the Earth. His book was not an invention. He specifies, this volume was not written to amuse those who read it. It is not a novel, but a serious book that tries to demonstrate to you, as far as possible, certain important truths that have been neglected until now. I give you the key to certain mysteries. Reed estimated that the Earth's crust is 1,300 kilometers thick, and its hollow interior 10,000 kilometers thick. His opinion is that the Aurora Borealis has nothing to do with any electrical or magnetic phenomenon. He argued this statement with an experiment that proved that this phenomenon has no effect on the compass needle. Reed also talks about a huge sea that stretches to the north. Many explorers like Dr. Bessels, D. Chester, Kane, Me Gary, Greeley, Pavey, and above all, Fridtjof Nansen talk about its existence. They all confirmed the existence of this sea above a certain latitude, i.e., after 80 degrees north latitude. Fridtjof Nansen, one of the most notorious and prodigious explorers of those times, described this freshwater sea in this way. This freshwater sea is a singular phenomenon, which occurs when a superficial layer of fresh water floats on a layer of salt water. This sweet sea slides under the heavy sea below, as if this sea constituted a fixed layer. The Norwegian Fridtjof Nansen was the first modern explorer who managed to approach the North Pole in 1897 up to a latitude of 86 degrees 15 minutes. He continues, the difference between these two liquid starts was so great that while we were above the potable water from the surface, we could extract from the bottom of the engine room water so salty that it could be used for the boiler. He estimated the depth at 3,300 to 3,900 meters. Marshall Gardner says that the Earth has two openings at the poles into which the ocean water that was draining on the Earth's crust both below and above pours. The center of gravity of the Earth was in the center of this crust. If a ship reached the opening of the Earth and continued heading towards the interior of the Earth, it sailed in reverse position on the internal wall of the Earth's crust. This point was so strong in this place that the salty water from the sea and the fresh water from the icebergs do not mix. The salty sea water remained a few tens of centimeters below the fresh water, which allowed them to have fresh water in the middle of the salty ocean. One of Gardner's perplexities was the origin of icebergs that were made of fresh water and not salt water. He said that the explorers who claimed that starting with the latitude of 80 degrees north, the pole is covered with ice, should have hallucinations, because the theory of the pole covered with ice is not valid at all. Everyone who lives in the north has noticed that there is a lot of fog in the Arctic in winter. If the ice had been all solid, there would not have been so much moisture in the air to form so much fog and steam. The American explorer Kane, who discovered the Humboldt Glacier and who explored the North Pole area between 1833 to 1855, wrote 150 years ago, "There are indications that clearly demonstrate that there must be an ocean in the north." The fog and mist that we see so often in winter confirms this. According to Reed and Gardner, this fresh water comes from the rivers of warm regions inside the Earth. When they reached the very cold surface, they froze quickly, forming icebergs. During the winter months, millions of cubic meters of fresh water from the inland rivers appeared from the polar openings, forming real icebergs. For Gardner, the frozen mammoths, discovered in the ice, were not prehistoric animals, but animals that live in these times inside the Earth. This would be the explanation why these mammoths, together with other species considered extinct, were cataloged as prehistoric, because they have not been seen on the surface for a long time. In reality, they were not prehistoric, but current, but in the underground world. Many of the mammoths still had unchewed grass in their mouths and stomachs, which supports the fact that they were caught, without realizing it, by an intense and extreme cold. Robert Cook reports that mammoths, rhinoceroses, reindeer, hippopotamuses, lions, and hyenas were found in the glacial deposits of the north. In his opinion, these animals that could not stand a frozen climate lived in the north a few million years ago, when the climate there was warm, tropical. Gardner never disagreed with this opinion. He proves that this was absolutely untrue, because it was about animals living in our times. He was right, because correctly, lions, hyenas, reindeer, rhinoceroses, and hippopotami are recent species and not prehistoric creatures. Gardner always agreed with Reed's assertions. He added other particularities to his explanations. Thus, he adds that inside the Earth there is a central sun much smaller than ours. The existence of this star explains the high temperatures between polar latitudes. This internal star strong in light and heat made plant, animal, and human life possible inside our Earth. This radiant heart of beneficial heat fully explains the existence of the Aurora Borealis. Reed thought as Gardner thought. He was convinced that the interior of the Earth was inhabited, but it was difficult for him to explain this because his theory excluded the existence of an internal central sun. The explorer Fridtjof Nansen, who published his diary to the pole in 1897, claims that he saw an image of an underground sun at noon, which could not be a mirage. It looked like a splendid fire shining towards the far edge of the ice. From the main height, Nansen sees many horizontal lines, one below the other, all of the same length, as if it were a square sun of pale red, with dark transverse rays. Nansen and his team did not expect to see this god of life reborn after the long polar night for several consecutive days, especially since they thought they had deviated far to the south. A simple optical illusion could not have lasted for days on end. Moreover, the area where Nansen was located in the polar area with total night. Consequently, he understands that it was not our sun that he sees, but a light that was emanating from something that was located in the center of the Earth. The black sun so adored by esotericists and Luciferian societies is actually the sun inside the Earth. After the Second World War, in 1947, there were many news stories in which it was said that the Nazis had sent people to the poles. In 1946, U.S. Navy Admiral Richard Byrd was sent as the head of the program called Operation High Jump, which aimed, among other things, to check if Nazi bases were nearby. During a flight on February 19, 1947, he reported seeing shiny objects in the shape of a flying disc, which had a swastika as a symbol and which forced him to land. Two very tall and blonde people greeted him, speaking English with a strong German accent. The Curtiss Condor plane, the type of aircraft with which Admiral Byrd makes the third aerial expedition in the Antarctic regions, with which he reaches the interior of the Earth. I have a copy of what is left of the Admiral's logbook in Italian. I have translated for this article a few lines that seem to me to be the strongest cry of despair of a man who has a secret that cannot be told. Being under the military oath, he could not publish his logbook, but when he felt that the moment had arrived, he gave all his notes to the press. A newspaper truck in which his diary was published left the printing house for the media distribution centers that were eagerly awaiting the big reveal. The truck never got around to destroying the precious writings. The Admiral dies in a strange accident, and only a few pages remain from his diary. Here is the shaky beginning. I have to write this diary secretly, in the greatest secrecy. He refers to my flight on February 19, 1947. There will come a time when people's thinking will melt into nothingness, and then they will have to accept the truth. I am not at liberty to distribute the following documents, which will probably never see the light of day, but I must do my duty to write them here. I hope that one day everyone will be able to read them, in a world where the egoism and greed of certain people will no longer be able to suppress the truth. Here are some descriptions of the underground. Extensive ice below us. A yellow color with linear pattern stands out. We get closer to better study that colored configuration, but purple and reddish colors appear. 29 minutes of flight have passed since I saw the mountains for the first time. This is not a hallucination. It is a small mountain range that I have never seen before. Outside the mountains is something that resembles a green valley with a small river or spring flowing towards the central part. But there must be no valley below here. There is something strange and abnormal here. We only had to fly over ice and snow. On the left are huge forests at the foot of the mountains. Our dashboard instruments spin like crazy. I fix the altitude of 1,400 feet and make a sharp left turn to examine the valley below us. It is green with moss and very thick grass. The light here is different. I can't see the sun at all. We take another walk to the left and see something that resembles a large animal. It looks like an elephant. No, it looks like a mammoth. That's incredible. And yet it is so. I descend to 1,000 feet and use the binoculars to better examine the animal. I confirm. It is about an animal that is identical to a mammoth. In 1956, Willis George Emerson published a book entitled The Smoking God, or A Journey into the Inner World, a title that refers to the internal sun of the earth and the extraordinary events experienced by the Norwegian Olaf Jansen and his son. Embarking on board a fishing vessel, the two wished to find the legendary country located beyond the north wind. They were projected by the waters in the polar opening and found themselves inside the planet, where they stayed for 2 years before coming out on the opposite side. They tell that there was a small and less bright sun that gave the impression that it was cloudy, as if it was surrounded by a cloud of smoke. Upon exiting the interior of the earth, they find themselves among glaciers. An iceberg cut the boat in two, and the father died. Upon returning home, the son recounts the events he went through with his father. He was imprisoned for 24 years in a psychiatric hospital because the doctors considered him mentally deficient. When he left the hospital, he became a fisherman and settled in California. He was almost 90 years old when the writer Willis George Emerson met him by chance. The old man feels that his death is near and decides to tell his secret to this man. He hands the journalist the maps that he and his father made of this endless land of the inner world of the earth. Raymond Bernard, another journalist of the past centuries, relates in an article the experience of a man who tells his Dr. Nephi Cottam from Los Angeles about the events he went through with his friend. I lived near the Arctic Circle in Norway. One day I decided with a friend of mine to take a trip to the farthest point of the north. We stocked up with everything and set sail. I had a beautiful and good fishing boat with sails, but I also had an engine on it. After a month, we had advanced a lot to the north and entered a mysterious country that surprised us with its temperature. The night was so hot that we couldn't sleep. Later, I saw something so strange that I was dumbfounded. In the middle of the sea, a kind of huge mountain rises in front of us, in which it seemed that the ocean starts to turn upside down as if it were overflowing. Curious, we continued sailing in that direction and found ourselves in a huge canyon that led us to the center of the earth. But the surprises did not end. We realized later that a sun was shining in its center, and the ocean that took us to those places was slowly disappearing, gradually becoming a river. This river, as we found out later, crossed the entire surface of the earth from one end to the other in such a way that if you followed the waterline you would reach its opposite end. I found that the internal surface has soils and waters just as there are outside. The sun was shining and the animal and plant life was developing in abundance. While we were going, we discovered fantastic landscapes. Everything was fantastic because everything had gigantic dimensions: plants, animals, and people. Yes, human beings. We met them and they were giants. They lived in houses and cities similar to the ones we have on the surface. They had an electric transport system that followed the course of the river from one city to another. These giants welcomed us with great kindness and invited us to eat with them. My friend went to one house, and I stayed in another. I was completely disoriented when I saw the gigantic size of those objects. They brought me a huge plate full of food that would have been enough for me to eat for a whole week. The giant gave me a bunch of grapes for dessert, each seed as big as a peach. The taste was delicious. Inside the earth, fruits and vegetables have a delicate smell and a subtle fragrance. They could not be compared to anything that we have on the surface. I stayed with the giants for a whole year. We were happy with their company as they were with our company. During our stay, we saw a large number of strange things. We were surprised by the vast knowledge these people possessed. During our entire stay, they didn't have the slightest trace of hostility or mistrust towards us, and they didn't say anything when we decided to leave. On the contrary, they offered us their protection and help if we needed it on our return journey. Jansen tells that the giants lived hundreds of years and were 4 to 5 meters tall. They had a very advanced science. They transmitted thoughts with the help of radiation and had energy sources much stronger than electricity. Raymond Bernard stated that these giants belonged to the antediluvian race of the Atlanteans. They took refuge in the center of the earth to protect themselves from the flood that destroyed their civilization. William Warren, in the book Paradise Found, or The Cradle of the Human Race, developed the idea that the human race was born on a tropical continent located in the Arctic area, in the famous Hyperborea of the ancient Greeks. The inhabitants were a kind of gods who lived thousands of years without aging. The ancient writings of the Egyptians, the Indians, the Chinese, or the legends of the Eskimos speak of a great opening to the interior of the earth. Other writers advanced the idea that the interior of the earth is inhabited by a race of small people with dark skin. They claim that the Eskimos, who do not belong to any type of current human race, actually come from this underground world. When the Eskimos are asked where they come from, reports Bernard, they point to the North Pole. Their legends speak of a wonderful land flooded with light, where there is no obscurity. There is a temperate climate, the lakes and rivers never overflow, the animals carol the bushes, and the birds of all colors fly in the sky. It is a land of eternal youth where all beings live thousands of years in peace and happiness. Regarding the origin of the Eskimos, Gardner writes, "The first Norwegians believed that these small dark-colored people came from the interior of the earth. In fact, if they were asked where their home was, they would point to the Arctic Pole. Eskimos are creatures that belong to another world that came from inside the earth, the place where fairies and elves lived." In his expeditions to the north, Nansen observes that the Eskimo population is increasing, and this increase is not only due to the fact that the species is multiplying, but due to a massive migration coming from the north. In the Middle Ages, it was believed that there was an extreme land located beyond the north which was given the name of Thule. This belief in a splendid kingdom inhabited by a strange people was very widespread. The official theory said that the polar regions led only to a land of eternal ice. But we see that it is not like that. The pole is not the desert about which the ice is said to never end. Gardner quoted a paragraph from the journal of the explorer Isaac Israel Hayes, who in 1869 made a trip to Greenland to explore the Ellesmere and Grinnell territories. He wrote in his diary, 78 degrees 17 minutes north latitude. I saw a yellow butterfly, who would have thought, a mosquito, 10 caterpillars, 3 spiders, 2 bees and 2 flies. Gardner deduced that they came from inside the earth. Hayes' observations were confirmed by the explorer Greely in his book 3 Years of Service in the Arctic, in which he tells that the wonders of the Arctic world are so extraordinary that he had to minimize the notes about this living world because he was afraid that he would be suspected of exaggeration. He tells about unknown species of birds and plants, not to mention flies and mosquitoes. He found a lot of acacia wood with which he made a fire. The explorer Sverdrup saw so many rabbits at 81 degrees north latitude that he named a fjord Rabbit Fjord. He found that there were so many wild animals that he could feed the entire crew of his expedition. Captain Beechey observed such a large number of birds on the west coast of the Spitzberg area that the earth resounds with their cries from dawn to dusk. Franklin saw whales migrating north. Where were they going? As the explorer advanced towards the extreme north, he met polar bears in front of him every time. These bears that were walking tirelessly to the north, where were they going? Commander McClure explored Banks Land and discovered vast amounts of trees scattered among the glaciers. Obviously, they were transported by the currents coming from the north. Some of this wood was petrified, but much of it was of recent origin. Nansen wondered where the driftwood on the coast of Greenland came from. Gardner was of the opinion that the further north one went, the more life there was, because these evidences were living testimony that in the far north there was a refuge, a region with a privileged climate, bearing plant and animal life. Theodore Fitch wrote a book based on the research done by Gardner and Reed entitled Il Paradiso Interno della Terra. In this book, he states that the internal ocean is much smaller than the external one, but that the land area is 3 times larger than the one on the surface. Fitch formulated a series of essential questions in this memorable book. If no river flows from the inside to the outside of the planet, then where are these huge icebergs that are formed entirely of fresh water formed? Why are tropical seeds of plants and trees floating in the fresh water of these icebergs? If the water of these glaciers cannot logically come from any point on Earth, how is it that it is still there? If the interface of the Earth does not benefit from a warm climate, then why do millions of tropical birds and animals that need a warm climate to survive meet in the middle of winter in the extreme north? Where does the pollen that colors the snow red, yellow, and blue come from? The book Il Libro Giallo No. 6 that I talked about at the beginning mentions about pollen and floating trees. There is another phenomenon that surprised many explorers. Originally, the snow was colored in red, black, green, or yellow. Samples were taken and it was determined that the black came from volcanic ash and the other colors came from flower pollen. What about pollen at the North Pole? Moreover, the pollen came from an infinite diversity of flowers that no one knows. Where did the hundreds of tree trunks that explorer Robert McClure found on Banks Land come from? McClure is the first white man to discover the Northwest Passage in its entire length. Where nothing grows, where ice is the absolute patron, he sees driftwood coming towards him. The trunks of the trees seem to have been pulled by the glaciers coming from the north. But trees in the extreme north? Nansen saw floating trees at 86 degrees north latitude, 4 degrees away from the pole. Maybe the trees are falling from the sky? Of course not. And Reed in his time revealed a black powder that colored the snow but did not deduce that it could come from an erupting volcano. Due to the fact that there is no volcano on the surface, he logically deduced that it had to be found inside the earth. Another American author published a small book in which he expresses his opinion about the structure of the earth. The old theory according to which the earth would have been a solid mass with a center consisting of fluid matter had to be thrown away, as well as the old belief that said that moving inside the heat amplifies. The pole would represent the outer edge of a magnetic circle, and in this case, the compass needle would lead us to the Earth. Farther from this circle, the Earth would descend in a smooth slope towards the interior. According to Raymond Bernard, the flying discs come from inside the Earth, being piloted by an underground race, an idea that was then taken up by many researchers. Captain Strauss presented a series of conferences in Brazil where he claims that the flight tracks of the flying discs are found in the underground kingdom of Agartha, whose capital is Shambhala. The inhabitants of this kingdom reached an extraordinary level of civilization and science, and they belonged to an antediluvian civilization that populated the vanished continents of Lemuria and Atlantis. When these continents were drowned, the survivors found refuge in the center of the planet, and Egypt and the Maya, Aztec and Inca's empires were actually colonies of Atlantis. From Brazil, where the theory of underground flying discs was first exposed, the idea landed in the United States. Ray Palmer, director of the magazine Disci Volanti, wrote in 1959, "The results of many years of research can allow us to put forward the hypothesis that the discs belong to our Earth, that they do not come from space, as was believed until now. A multitude of evidence shows us that there is a large unknown place, unexplored yet, where these flying discs very likely come from. Our magazine has collected a large amount of overwhelming evidence that proves that these aircraft belong to this Earth. This is recognized by many governments as the reality. We have made enormous efforts to know more about these things, which are of such great importance that they have been covered by a world secret." During the 70s, many photographs of the North Pole taken by meteorological satellites were published. These photos supported the hollow Earth theory due to the hole seen at the pole of the Earth. It is about photos taken on January 6, 1967 by the U.S. Environmental Science Service Administration ESSA-3 satellite, and then by the ESSA-7 satellite.